On a quiet July afternoon in Indiana, a young bride-to-be carried a basket of laundry into a neighborhood laundromat. She was just weeks away from her wedding day, her dress already picked out, the date circled on the calendar, the invitation sent. She was 28 years old, full of life, full of plans, and about to start a new chapter. But after that simple errand, she was never seen again. Her name was Marilyn Niqui McCown. Her disappearance wasn't just sudden, it was devastating. One moment she was preparing for the happiest day of her life. The next she was gone without a trace. This is not the story of a wedding. It's the story of a mystery, one that has haunted a family, baffled investigators, and lingered over the city of Richmond, Indiana for more than 20 years. Welcome back to the Cold Case Archive, where we bring you deep into unsolved mysteries and haunting disappearances. If you want to join us as we shine a light on the stories that time refuses to bury, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on the cases that still demand answers. Now, let's go back to the summer of 2001, when a woman on the cusp of marriage vanished into silence and left behind questions that still echo today. Before she became the center of an unsolved disappearance, Niqui McCown was known for her energy, her strength, and her loyalty to the people she loved. Born Marilyn Renee McCown, she grew up in Richmond, Indiana, a small city with a population just shy of 40,000. Richmond wasn't glamorous, but it was home. It was the kind of place where neighbors recognized each other at the grocery store, where children grew up alongside the same classmates for years, and where families like the McCowns built their lives. Niqui was close to her family, especially her mother, her sisters, and her 9-year-old daughter from a previous relationship. As the middle child, she carried a natural balance between responsibility and independence. She was the one who could make others laugh when the mood was tense, but she was also the one you could count on when things needed to get done. Her friends remembered her as fearless but not reckless. She was ambitious but grounded. She had a smile that drew people in, and a laugh that stayed in a room long after she left. To those who knew her, she was a vibrant woman with a big heart, the kind of person who seemed destined to live a long, fulfilling life surrounded by family. By 2001, Niqui had built a stable and respectable career. She worked as a corrections officer at the Montgomery Education and Pre-Release Center in Dayton, Ohio. It wasn't an easy job. It required discipline, patience, and the ability to handle herself in stressful environments. But Niqui thrived there. She was respected by her co-workers for being professional, dependable, and unflinching in the face of challenges. This wasn't a woman who shied away from responsibility. She embraced it. And she balanced her career with her role as a devoted mother and a loving daughter. Her life was full, and it was only getting fuller. Because in the summer of 2001, she wasn't just a corrections officer. She wasn't just a mother or a daughter. She was a bride-to-be. Niqui's engagement to Bobby Webster was one of the most exciting moments of her life. Friends recalled how she lit up whenever she talked about him, and how wedding planning became her favorite subject. The date was set for August, just a few weeks away. The dress had been chosen, the details were falling into place, and Niqui couldn't wait to walk down the aisle. Her family remembered her excitement in the weeks leading up to the big day. She was preparing everything with care, checking every detail, and sharing her anticipation with those closest to her. She wasn't nervous, she was ready. This was the future she wanted. Her co-workers at the prison even teased her about her constant wedding chatter. But to Niqui, it was more than just a party or a ceremony. It was the start of the life she had been working toward: stability, partnership, and happiness. To understand the backdrop of her disappearance, it's worth picturing Richmond at that time. A small city along the Ohio border, Richmond was known for its historic architecture and Midwestern charm. It wasn't free from crime, but it wasn't the kind of place where people expected someone to vanish without a trace. In 2001, it was a community where people kept their doors unlocked, where gossip traveled fast, and where a missing person case quickly became everyone's business. That summer, the weather was hot but ordinary. Life moved at its usual pace. Families went about their routines, and the city prepared for the end of July, back-to-school season for some, late summer weddings for others. Nothing seemed out of place. But that would change on July 22nd. That morning, Niqui woke up with errands to run. It wasn't anything dramatic. No strange encounters, no cryptic warnings. Just a simple Sunday routine. She gathered laundry, planned to stop at the laundromat, and expected to return home like always. To her family, it was just another weekend. To Niqui, it was just another day closer to the happiest one of her life. But here's the chilling reality about cold cases. More often than not, the moments that lead to tragedy look painfully ordinary. A drive to the store, a short walk in the neighborhood, a visit to the laundromat. Things we all do without a second thought. For Niqui, it was a load of laundry that marked the end of her visible trail. She carried her clothes into the laundromat, like she had done many times before. Witnesses saw her. She was calm, composed, untroubled. But after that, the timeline grows foggy. Somewhere between the laundromat and her home, she disappeared. When we tell these stories, it's easy to focus on the crime, the suspects, the evidence. But at the center of every case is a person. And in this case, that person was a mother, a daughter, a friend, and a bride who never got to walk down the aisle. Her wedding dress would never be worn. Her future plans would never be realized. Her laughter would never again fill her family's home. The disappearance of Marilyn Niqui McCown wasn't just the loss of a person. It was the loss of a life full of promise. And as investigators would soon learn, the search for her would reveal unsettling details, conflicting accounts, and a trail that raised more questions than it answered. But in the very beginning, all anyone knew was this: she went to do laundry, and she never came back. Sunday, July 22, 2001, began like any other day in Richmond, Indiana. It was the kind of midsummer weekend where the heat lingered on the pavement, where people carried on with their usual routines, and where nothing seemed out of place. For 28-year-old Marilyn Niqui McCown, it was a simple day for running errands, the kind of day she had lived countless times before. She had been in good spirits that weekend. The countdown to her wedding was now only a matter of weeks, and she was balancing excitement with the practical tasks that still had to be finished. That morning, she left home with laundry in hand. It was ordinary, routine, almost forgettable. But hindsight has a cruel way of reshaping those ordinary details. That simple errand would turn out to be the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Niqui drove to a local laundromat in Richmond, just a short distance from her home. Witnesses later recalled that she was calm, composed, and behaving normally. She washed her clothes, including some belonging to her fiancé, and seemed entirely focused on her chores. There was nothing about her demeanor that suggested anything unusual. No arguments, no signs of distress, no indication that she felt unsafe. And yet, something happened after she left that laundromat. Something that would fracture her family's life forever. The timeline after that grows blurred. At some point between leaving the laundromat and returning home, Niqui disappeared. She never made it back to her apartment. Her laundry never reached her closet. The basket she carried would become frozen in time, discovered later as a haunting reminder of what she never returned to finish. For her family, the first few hours didn't immediately set off alarms. Like many adults with busy schedules, it wasn't unusual for Niqui to make additional stops or take longer than expected. But as the afternoon stretched into evening, unease began to set in. Calls to her phone went unanswered. The hours ticked by, and the woman who was usually reliable and communicative had gone completely silent. By nightfall, the concern was impossible to ignore. This wasn't like her. Her mother and sisters began to worry, and her fiancé noticed her absence too. The woman who was supposed to be finalizing her wedding plans was suddenly unreachable. At first, family members tried to reason through possibilities. Maybe she had decided to visit a friend. Maybe she had been delayed somewhere along the way. Maybe her phone battery had died. But deep down, a gnawing sense of dread began to take hold. By late that night, it was clear something was wrong. This wasn't a matter of being late or distracted. Something had happened. And by the following morning, her family's worry had hardened into fear. For those who knew her, the silence was the loudest alarm. Niqui wasn't the kind of woman to simply vanish. She was responsible, dependable, and deeply connected to her family. She had a daughter waiting for her. She had a wedding she was preparing for. She had no reason to walk away. Her disappearance that day seemed to come from nowhere, like a door slamming shut on a life in progress. In the days that followed, witnesses would help reconstruct the fragments of her last known movements. Yes, she had been seen at the laundromat. Yes, she had been carrying laundry. Yes, she had looked fine, even content. But what happened in the short span of time between that moment and the hours that followed has never been fully explained. Her car was missing. Her laundry was missing. And so was she. The sudden absence left her family in shock. Her mother, who had spoken to her earlier, struggled to comprehend how her daughter could vanish so suddenly. Her sisters felt the unease of not knowing where she was or why she wasn't answering her phone. And her fiancé, who had been preparing to marry her within weeks, now faced the unthinkable: his bride-to-be was gone. By the end of that Sunday, her family realized they were at the beginning of a nightmare. The ordinary rhythms of their lives had been shattered. The wedding plans that once filled their conversations were replaced with urgent calls, frantic questions, and the sinking realization that something was terribly, terribly wrong. In many missing persons cases, the first 24 hours are the most critical. Those hours set the foundation for the investigation, the search, and the hope of bringing someone home alive. But in Niqui's case, those hours slipped by with no answers. No phone calls. No sightings. No sign of where she had gone. What should have been a day defined by simple errands had become the day she disappeared. Her family's search for her began almost immediately. They called around, checked places she might have gone, and tried to trace her steps. But as the hours turned into days, their hope began to tangle with fear. It wasn't just that she hadn't come home. It was that she had vanished in the middle of her ordinary life. She hadn't taken money. She hadn't packed belongings. She hadn't left any kind of note or clue that she was planning to go anywhere. Everything in her life, her job, her family, her wedding, pointed to a woman firmly rooted in her future. And yet she was gone. That July day would mark the beginning of an investigation that stretched across state lines, drew in multiple agencies, and left a family pleading for answers that still haven't come. But before any of that began, before police were called and before the media took notice, there was only the silence of her absence. One moment she was there, loading clothes into a washer. The next, she had stepped into the shadow of one of Indiana's most haunting mysteries. For her loved ones, the day of July 22nd would never end. It would replay in their minds endlessly. The last sight of her at the laundromat, the unanswered calls, the empty apartment, the chilling absence of her car. And for investigators, this was only the beginning. The missing pieces of her day, the gaps between what was known and what was lost, would fuel a search that revealed disturbing discoveries, but never the answers her family desperately needed. When Niqui failed to return home on July 22nd, her family's unease quickly hardened into alarm. By the next morning, the situation was undeniable. Something was terribly wrong. Calls had gone unanswered, clothes remained uncollected, and her presence, the dependable rhythm of her life, had been abruptly cut off. It was then that her family contacted law enforcement. Richmond police were the first to respond. At the outset, her case was treated with a measured approach, as missing adult cases often were in the early 2000s. Officers asked routine questions. Did she have a history of leaving home unexpectedly? Had there been arguments or stress in her personal life? Could she have decided to step away voluntarily, even temporarily? Her family's response was immediate and emphatic. No. This was not who Niqui was. She wasn't a drifter. She wasn't someone who disappeared without a word. She had roots, her job, her daughter, her fiancé, and a wedding that was just weeks away. She had no reason to vanish, no secret life waiting elsewhere. For her family, the very suggestion that she might have left on her own was inconceivable. Still, police had to begin somewhere. They retraced her last known steps. Witnesses confirmed she had been at the laundromat that Sunday. She had carried her laundry in, washed it, and gone about her chores with nothing unusual in her demeanor. That trail, however, ended abruptly. After she left, there was no clear indication of where she went. Detectives canvassed the surrounding area. They checked nearby businesses, parking lots, and streets, searching for anyone who might have seen her. They knocked on doors, interviewed potential witnesses, and tried to reconstruct the timeline. But every attempt seemed to lead back to the same dead end. She left the laundromat and then she was gone. Her family grew increasingly desperate. Niqui's mother, sisters, and fiancé pleaded for her safe return. Flyers went up around Richmond. Friends and co-workers joined the search. What had started as a private worry quickly grew into a community effort. Then came a chilling discovery, one that expanded the investigation far beyond Richmond. Days after she vanished, Niqui's car was found abandoned in Dayton, Ohio, roughly 45 miles from her home. The vehicle was parked at an apartment complex, a location she had no known reason to visit. Inside were her freshly washed clothes, neatly folded but left behind. To investigators, this detail was haunting. It was as if her life had been paused mid-motion. The clothes clean but unworn, the laundry basket still full, her plans left unfinished. The car's location raised disturbing questions. Why was it in Dayton? Who had driven it there? And what did that place mean in relation to her disappearance? What do you think? Does the discovery of her car suggest she was lured there by someone she trusted, or was it simply meant as a distraction? Detectives began digging into her connections to Dayton. They learned that her former fiancé lived there, and that she still had loose ties to the area. This discovery added complexity to the case. Was her disappearance linked to past relationships? Was it a coincidence that her car ended up there? Or was Dayton the key to understanding what had happened? Investigators interviewed her fiancé at the time, along with her ex and other men in her life. They scrutinized their accounts, looking for inconsistencies. Each man denied involvement, yet suspicion lingered. For her family, the discovery of the car deepened their fear. It was one thing for her to be missing. It was another to know her vehicle had been abandoned miles away, with her belongings still inside. That car, once a symbol of freedom and mobility, had become a silent witness to her disappearance. Police expanded their efforts. Search teams combed through areas near where the car was found. They brought in dogs, scoured fields and wooded lots, and checked rivers and back roads. But no trace of Niqui herself emerged. The media began to cover the case more widely. News reports highlighted her upcoming wedding, her sudden disappearance, and the discovery of the car. Her family made public appeals, standing before cameras with photographs of her smiling face. They begged for information, pleaded with the public for tips, and urged anyone who knew something to come forward. Leads trickled in, but none provided the breakthrough investigators desperately needed. Each new tip seemed to dissolve into speculation or uncertainty. Behind the scenes, detectives wrestled with difficult questions. Was this a case of foul play? Or had she somehow chosen to walk away, despite every indication to the contrary? The evidence pointed toward something sinister, but there was no body, no crime scene, no direct proof. As days turned into weeks, the uncertainty began to fracture those closest to her. Tension grew between her fiancé and her family. Each side dealt with grief and suspicion in their own way, but the lack of answers only fueled mistrust. Fingers were pointed, accusations whispered, theories formed and dissolved. Everyone wanted answers, but the silence was unrelenting. And yet, the investigation pressed on. Detectives continued to follow every lead, from examining her relationships to combing through her financial records and phone activity. They searched for anything that might suggest a plan, a motive, or a clue. But everything they uncovered pointed back to the same unsettling truth. Niqui had vanished in the middle of her life, leaving no clear explanation behind. The discovery of her car in Dayton remained the central puzzle piece, a clue that spoke volumes but explained little. Why was it there? Who had left it? And why, after finding it, were police still no closer to finding her? By late summer, the community's hope began to fray. The posters still hung in store windows, the family still held vigils, but the case seemed to stall. Detectives admitted they were running out of leads. Each passing day made the prospect of finding her alive less likely. For her family, those weeks were agony. The unanswered questions multiplied. They replayed every conversation, every detail of her last day, searching for meaning. And as they watched the investigation drag on, their fear turned into a kind of grief that had no resolution. Still, they refused to give up. Niqui's car sat silently in Dayton, her clothes folded neatly inside, and her family begging for answers. The investigation had uncovered pieces of the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. And as suspicion swirled around those closest to her, the case took on a darker edge, one that would bring old wounds and hidden tensions to the surface. When police first began looking deeper into Niqui's disappearance, they quickly realized this was not a case that would resolve itself with a simple lead or a single witness statement. Every avenue opened more questions than answers. Investigators meticulously reviewed her personal relationships, scrutinized former acquaintances, and attempted to trace her movements in the hours and days leading up to July 22nd. One of the first areas of focus was her fiancé. Bobby Webster had been preparing to marry Niqui in just a few weeks, and he was understandably devastated by her disappearance. He cooperated fully with the police, providing details about her routines, her plans, and her connections. Yet even with his transparency, Detectives examined the dynamics of their relationship closely. They asked difficult questions. Had there been arguments recently? Had anyone expressed resentment or jealousy? Was there tension that might suggest someone close to her had motive? At the same time, investigators revisited Niqui's past relationships. Her previous fiancé and several other men she had dated were interviewed thoroughly. Each denied involvement, but police had to consider every possibility. Who could have had both the opportunity and the motive to make someone vanish so suddenly? While law enforcement worked behind the scenes, the community began to speculate. Rumors spread quickly in Richmond. Whispers about past lovers, suspicions about friends, and questions about who might have been in her life at the time. The attention was relentless, but it also complicated the investigation. Misinformation and exaggeration circulated alongside genuine tips, forcing police to sift carefully through each claim. Meanwhile, the discovery of Niqui's car in Dayton remained one of the most significant pieces of evidence. The location itself seemed to suggest a connection to someone familiar with both her routine and the surrounding area. Detectives wondered, had she been followed, lured away, or had someone deliberately moved the car to create confusion? They expanded their search radius, reviewing any sightings, possible vehicle movements, and even surveillance at nearby locations where the car had been left. Her family grew increasingly frustrated with the pace of the investigation. Hours of questioning, endless searches, and repeated interviews left them exhausted and anxious. They wanted concrete answers, not theories or hypotheticals. Yet despite the police effort, the missing woman remained elusive. The lack of closure took an emotional toll on everyone connected to her, intensifying the tension between family, friends, and investigators. Public attention mounted. Local news outlets ran features about her disappearance, highlighting her upcoming wedding and the mystery of the abandoned car. Viewers were encouraged to call tips in, and community members organized searches, distributing flyers and canvassing neighborhoods. Every new lead, every potential sighting brought hope, and yet each one ultimately faded, leaving the family to confront a growing sense of despair. Amid this mounting pressure, investigators began to piece together subtle inconsistencies. Witness statements were reviewed, timelines re-examined, and potential contradictions flagged. Were there details that didn't add up? Was someone withholding information? These questions haunted detectives as they dug deeper into Niqui's life, relationships, and daily routines. One particular line of inquiry focused on the dynamics between her ex-partners and those closest to her. Investigators wanted to understand who had opportunity, who had motive, and who might have acted in ways that were uncharacteristic or suspicious. Each interview, each alibi was scrutinized. Yet despite careful analysis, no definitive suspect emerged. The case remained frustratingly opaque. It was during this stage that public engagement became crucial. Families, friends, and neighbors were asked to come forward with anything, no matter how trivial it seemed. Did anyone notice a strange vehicle in the area? Had anyone spoken with Niqui in the days leading up to her disappearance? These small details often became key pieces in cold cases, and the detectives relied on them heavily. As the investigation progressed, patterns began to emerge, but they were fragmented and inconclusive. Certain individuals were flagged for further questioning, while others were cleared entirely. Every lead had to be verified meticulously, a painstaking process that could take weeks or months. Meanwhile, Niqui's family continued to live in uncertainty, hoping that one day answers would finally arrive. For viewers following this story, it's worth considering. What do you think? Was Niqui's disappearance the result of someone she knew, or could it have been a stranger taking advantage of her routine? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your insight might reflect the questions that haunted investigators themselves. Amid this tension, we want to pause and remind you. If you're finding this story gripping, don't forget to subscribe to the Cold Case Archive and turn on notifications. By subscribing, you'll follow each development, get deeper insights into unsolved cases, and join us as we uncover the mysteries that time refuses to forget. Even with the public's help, the investigation moved slowly. Evidence had to be processed carefully, statements corroborated, and potential leads verified. Every day without a breakthrough added weight to the mystery and intensified the family's grief. Yet, through all of this, one thing remained clear. Niqui's disappearance was not ordinary. The ordinary errands, the everyday routines, and the mundane errands that Sunday had been shattered, leaving a void that no one could explain. As the investigation deepened, detectives were left with one undeniable reality: there was more to this case than met the eye. Something, or someone, had intervened in her life in a way that left no trace, at least none that investigators could immediately follow. The stakes were growing higher, and the search for Niqui McCown was entering one of its most critical phases. The investigation into Niqui McCown's disappearance had entered a critical phase. Days turned into weeks, and the urgency to find her alive grew more desperate with every passing moment. Detectives knew that time was the most critical factor in missing persons cases, but despite extensive searches and multiple interviews, the trail remained frustratingly cold. Law enforcement began revisiting every piece of evidence, no matter how minor it seemed. They re-examined her last known movements, from the laundromat to the routes she might have taken afterward. Every interaction, every detail from that day was scrutinized. Did she speak to anyone on her way home? Did someone see her car after she left? Were there witnesses who had overlooked a detail that might now prove crucial? Meanwhile, investigators looked more closely at people in her immediate circle. Friends, co-workers, and acquaintances were re-interviewed to check for inconsistencies or overlooked information. One of the most pressing questions was whether Niqui's disappearance could be linked to someone she knew and trusted. The fact that her car had been abandoned hundreds of miles away in Dayton, Ohio, suggested the involvement of someone with knowledge of her routine and movements. Despite these efforts, no clear suspect emerged. Detectives were faced with a maze of possibilities. Could this have been someone with a personal vendetta? Was it a calculated crime of opportunity? Or, as some considered, had Niqui somehow chosen to leave on her own, though every indication suggested otherwise? The absence of her body or concrete evidence pointing to foul play left investigators navigating a case with far more questions than answers. As the investigation continued, police began to notice subtle patterns. Certain statements conflicted with one another. Minor details and timelines didn't add up. Each new clue seemed to open more questions than it solved. Investigators documented these inconsistencies meticulously, hoping that piecing them together might reveal a critical breakthrough. For Niqui's family, every day was an agonizing exercise in hope and despair. They waited for answers that never arrived, replaying the last known moments of her life over and over in their minds. Her mother, sisters, and fiancé clung to fragments of information, any lead that might point them toward closure. Each dead end left them frustrated and heartbroken, yet they refused to abandon the search. The media also kept the story in the public eye. News outlets featured updates on the investigation, highlighting the mystery of the abandoned car, the nationwide searches, and the appeals from family and friends. Public interest created both support and pressure. Tips flooded in, some useful, others misleading. Volunteers joined searches, scoured neighborhoods, and distributed flyers, hoping to uncover something that law enforcement might have missed. At this stage, investigators faced a challenging question. Was Niqui's disappearance the result of a crime, or could there have been another explanation? The circumstances were unusual. A young woman with strong ties to her family and community, engaged in preparing for her wedding, vanishing without warning. This scenario defied typical patterns of voluntary disappearance, yet the absence of a body, forced entry, or clear crime scene complicated the case. Through the weeks, detectives followed up on countless leads. They traced phone records, interviewed more distant acquaintances, and explored any connection to areas she might have visited. Each lead demanded time and resources, but the results were often inconclusive. This period of the investigation underscored the frustrating reality of missing persons cases. Even when investigators know someone is missing, knowing why and by whom is infinitely more difficult. One aspect that captured attention was the family's perspective. Tensions grew as unanswered questions mounted. Her fiancé was questioned extensively, as were former partners and friends who had known her closely. While cooperation was provided willingly, the pressure of suspicion weighed heavily. The emotional toll on the family was palpable, each day stretching longer and darker without any sign of her return. Meanwhile, law enforcement sought to maintain public engagement. Appeals were made repeatedly, urging anyone with knowledge of Niqui's disappearance to step forward. The public was asked to consider details others might have overlooked. A car seen on a road near her home, a stranger lingering near her neighborhood, or any unusual activity in Dayton. Every piece of information, however small, could be the key to unraveling the mystery. And yet, despite the exhaustive efforts, the investigation appeared to stall. For the community, the longer Niqui remained missing, the more the sense of helplessness grew. Posters faded in store windows, volunteers' efforts slowed, and the media coverage, once urgent and frequent, began to wane. But for her family, every day without answers was a day of grief and uncertainty, a reminder that the ordinary life she had lived had been irrevocably interrupted. For viewers following this story, one question remains. When someone disappears under such suspicious circumstances, do you believe it is more likely the result of someone she knew, or a random act? Consider the abandoned car, the neatly folded clothes left behind, and the sudden vanishing. What scenario seems most plausible to you? As the weeks turned into months, detectives compiled hundreds of pages of notes, witness statements, and reports. Each document was analyzed for patterns, each potential discrepancy noted. They examined everything from her personal relationships to public spaces she frequented. Yet, with every new detail, the case seemed to deepen its mystery rather than clarify it. The emotional burden on her family was mirrored by the investigators themselves. They faced a case that refused to conform to conventional patterns, a disappearance that left only fragments in its wake. And while the family clung to hope, law enforcement had to grapple with the sobering possibility that the trail might never lead to clear answers. As this phase of the investigation drew on, a critical tension became evident, the balance between pursuing new leads and revisiting old ones. Every minor clue was examined again, from sightings in nearby towns to connections in Dayton. Detectives hoped that revisiting these details might spark a breakthrough. Despite the obstacles, one thing remained certain. Niqui McCown's disappearance had left an indelible mark. The ordinary errands, the daily routines, and the life she was building for herself and her daughter had all been disrupted by a single, inexplicable act. The search continued, driven by hope, community support, and the relentless pursuit of answers. Years have passed since Niqui McCown vanished from Richmond, Indiana. For her family and those who knew her, the absence of answers has left a void that remains profoundly difficult to fill. Every day since July 22, 2001, has been a struggle between hope and despair, with the quiet knowledge that life had been irrevocably altered in an instant. The investigation itself moved through cycles of activity and stagnation. Police continued to follow leads whenever they emerged, revisiting old evidence, re-interviewing acquaintances, and checking tips from the public. Niqui's car, discovered abandoned in Dayton, Ohio, remained a central focus. While it provided some context for her disappearance, it ultimately offered no clear path to her whereabouts. Each analysis and forensic examination added detail to the timeline, but none revealed the full truth. Despite these limitations, law enforcement worked tirelessly. The Bay County Sheriff's Office maintained the case as a priority, understanding the importance of pursuing every potential lead. Over the years, advances in technology, databases, and investigative techniques offered hope that something previously overlooked could finally illuminate the truth. Yet even as tools evolved, Niqui remained missing, her fate unknown. For her family, the absence of closure has been both heartbreaking and infuriating. Her mother, sisters, and fiancé have lived with the constant question of what happened that day, questions that have no definitive answers. Every anniversary, every milestone, every ordinary day serves as a reminder of the life she once led and the life that could have been. Public awareness helped keep her story alive. Media coverage, though intermittent, ensured that her disappearance was not forgotten. Community members, friends, and volunteers contributed to searches, distributed flyers, and offered support to her family. In a case like this, the shared effort of the community becomes part of the ongoing investigation, and in some ways, part of the emotional survival of those affected. Over time, theories emerged, as they inevitably do in unsolved cases. Some suggested foul play by someone she knew, citing the abandoned car and sudden disappearance as evidence. Others speculated she may have left voluntarily, though these claims conflicted with everything known about her character and life at the time. Investigators considered every scenario carefully, weighing evidence against conjecture, but the facts remained frustratingly limited. One thing that became clear through these years was that Niqui McCown's disappearance was more than just a missing person case. It was a story that revealed the fragility of everyday life. A routine errand, a simple act of carrying laundry, became the last known steps of a life abruptly interrupted. And for those who watched and waited, it was a reminder of how quickly normalcy can be shattered. For families of missing persons, the emotional toll is profound. The uncertainty, the lack of answers, the hope that cycles between optimism and despair, all these factors weigh heavily on those left behind. In Niqui's case, her daughter, fiancé, and parents have carried this weight for decades, seeking justice, closure, or even the smallest fragment of certainty about her fate. From the perspective of the investigation, this case also highlights the challenges that law enforcement faces with cold cases. Evidence can be limited, leads can dry up, and over time, memories fade. Yet detectives remain committed to the pursuit of truth. Each tip, no matter how old, is a potential key to solving the mystery. The case remains open, and the hope persists that someday answers may emerge. For viewers reflecting on Niqui's story, one question lingers. Given everything known, the abandoned car in Dayton, the abrupt disappearance, and the absence of any confirmed sightings, what do you think truly happened to her? Could someone close to her have been involved, or does another explanation make more sense? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective mirrors the questions that have haunted her family and investigators for over 2 decades. While the case remains unsolved, Niqui McCown's story is not forgotten. Each retelling, each investigation, and each public appeal ensures that her life, her struggles, and her disappearance remain part of the collective memory. It is a reminder of the fragility of life, the enduring hope of loved ones, and the relentless pursuit of justice that defines every cold case. Her story continues to inspire communities to remain vigilant, to support families of the missing, and to contribute to ongoing investigations. And though the answers remain elusive, the legacy of her life and the urgency of finding truth continue to resonate, a haunting echo of what was lost and a call to never forget. This has been the Cold Case Archive. Thank you for joining us as we preserve these stories one file at a time. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on cold cases, unsolved mysteries, and the stories that demand answers. Sharing this video can also help keep awareness alive and support the ongoing search for truth.